Hello and welcome to our podcast on Stoicism. Today we're going to be speaking to me, Dylan,
Christina.
And Varun.
about what Stoicism is and how it can affect your everyday life. First we're going to go to Christina for a bit of background context on what Stoicism actually is. Over to you.
Stoicism 101. Stoicism is a school of philosophy that hails from ancient Greece and Rome in the early parts of the 3rd century BC. It is a philosophical theory of life that maximizes positive emotions, reduces negative emotions, and helps individuals hone their virtues of character.
So Faroum, what does that actually mean?
Okay, so the main principle of Stoicism is differentiating between what is in our control and what is not in our control. The things in our control are things such as our judgments, our desires, our aversions, and our our freedom to make moral choices. The things that are not in our control are anything external that can happen to us, any possessions that we have, even friends, family, and our bodies. And what the Stoic does is they shift the focus from what they cannot control to what they can.
Right, that is very interesting. So how does a Stoic do if the virtues are subjective? How does a Stoic deal with problems if one might say the virtues are subjective?
So it's a bit like virtue ethics when it comes to ethics, right? So there are contradictions when it comes to virtues, but you have to almost make your own. This isn't an ethical philosophy, it's more like a practical philosophy, a philosophy that you would use in your day-to-day life. So with how to be a good person and stuff like that, you look at the virtues. There are 4 virtues firstly. There's courage, there's wisdom, there's moderation, and there's justice. So for example, courage, you have to define for yourself what courage is, and you have to come up with your own values. For one person it might be something really extreme, like killing themselves for a good cause or something like that. For another person it could be as simple as speaking out more in class. Right? It's personalized to you. The same goes for wisdom, justice, and temperance.
Mm-hmm.
There's no set guides or rules.
So it's quite good in the sense that it's flexible and it can be
Mhm.
adapted to everyone's life, which makes it a theory that you don't necessarily have to know everything about philosophy. It's just something you can apply to your everyday
Yeah.
life. So
Great.
would you like to demonstrate an example with me?
Of course I would, yes.
Yeah? So I'm just another guy going into work one day when my boss, Christina,
And I
here.
am the boss.
Yep. So I'm going into work. I go into my office. I've been called to the office.
So you've been called into the office
Mm.
and you haven't done your job right,
Oh,
and there's
sorry
a younger, better version that can
Oh.
do the job. So now I will fire you.
oh. Oh no, how could you do that? My life is ruined. I can't cope. Let me go home and cry in my utter sadness.
Okay, so now we are going to recreate this if Dylan was a Stoic. So before he was an ordinary man getting fired. Now he's trying to be a sage, the virtuous, attaining to the perfection of moral goal.
Mhm.
Okay, so I'm the boss, now you're fired. How would you react?
Okay, thank you for that notice. I'll now leave my work and see this as an opportunity to find new work, something possibly better, because the only thing that is actually in my control is my attitude to that. And I've learned that that is a mistake I shouldn't make in a future role. And I can see how this has brought me the opportunity to find new, maybe better employment, and that this shouldn't be something that destroys my life.
Mm-hmm.
This is a scenario that can be applied to multiple different things. Maybe you want to give us some more examples, Tarun.
Any sort of misfortune really.
Mm.
Maybe being attacked, something like dropping your plates on the floor and breaking it, things like that. What you've basically displayed is choosing the right attitude in that situation. You could either be upset or you could have seen it as an opportunity. Neither of them are going to change the fact that you got fired, but one is actually going to make you a bit more happier and potentially improve your future.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. That links into good and bad. And in natural moral law, Aquinas kind of touched upon genuine good or genuine bad, and he said that people are usually misled when it comes to what they know is bad or good. in this situation, being fired may seem like a bad thing, but then the Stoic would try and see the good and the positive in it, and he might see the good stuff in, as in now he has room to, maybe this happened to him because in the future he gets a better job, more enjoyable job. Maybe this happened to him so he can almost train his patience and train his self-control, because you do need to train these things. And so it's more like an opportunity for one, practically improve his life, and two, improve his morals.
And I think this becomes very relevant to modern society in a time when people put so much emphasis on things like money and possessions, materialism, especially in like our modern Western way of living. I think if someone finds that maybe they fall short of living their usual comfortable lifestyle, like maybe they become unemployed, or like they have to pay more for their energy bills, which is quite a topical thing, it's the way in which you respond that you should that in how you should react, rather than complaining about the problem itself and kind of throwing your hands in the air and
placing everything
saying
under
there's
a
nothing you can do.
positive light.
A good quote that I remember is that it's not what happens to us, it's what judgments we make out of it. It's a judgment that matters. It's a judgment that shows whether something is good or bad. So a Stoic would see external things, possessions, money, misfortunes as indifferent, virtue as good, and vice as bad.
Could you explain vices for the people that don't already know what that means?
Vice would be like cowardice, being malicious, angry at people, the generic bad things that most philosophers agree on. Most philosophers will agree that anger is bad. Those are vices, and virtue is kindness, compassion, and things like that. They believe those are the only good. Those are the things that you need to become happy and achieve your own.
And also, building on like the materialist element, it differs from a philosophy like cynicalism, in the sense that it's not saying you should destroy all your possessions and live a life without anything, whereas you should try and live a life with possessions, but possessions you're not morally attached to, and you wouldn't feel morally destroyed if those possessions were to be taken from you.
So a Stoic could be like, I know that it's not good, I'll use it while I can, and I'll keep it while knowing that it's not needed to make me happy. So I don't need it to make me happy, it's just for the experience. I know that it's not truly valued. When you have that attitude to possessions, you're kind of detached to it and you're ready to let go of it at any moment. Most people, they're attached to it, they see it as something good. And it's when it's taken away, the word Stoic uses torn away. They're extremely hurt when they lose these things. You want to be in a state where you can let go, just give it away. That makes sense.
Right. And one question we usually get is, does Stoicism believe in fatalism? Which is preserving our tranquility.
Stoicism does believe in preserving our tranquility. That's probably one of the most important points of that principle, of this philosophy. They try their best to make their life tranquil. When we say tranquil, it's not just avoiding being sad, it's also avoiding being overjoyed, like irrationally joyful at things. Like a person who's won the lottery would be over the moon, right? But a Stoic would be indifferent to that because he doesn't care about that money.
Would they just take a rational approach?
So for Stoic sage, the perfect thing, there's no up and down, there's just like a constant line of emotion.
So a bit like with virtue ethics, it finds the balance between an excess and a deficiency, to put it like that. And also I think this philosophy is really good in one day as well, because you don't have to be religious necessarily to follow it. Like someone that comes and tells you about a theory like natural moral law, or they try and explain all these rules to you that are written out in the Bible or the Quran, to a lot of people these days that doesn't have as much meaning to them. Whereas something like this, it's not something you've got to, every action you make, you don't have to consider the consequence and the rules. It's more just like a passive thing you develop to make you a better person.
A lot of the Stoics were religious, but the philosophy itself does not require you to be religious. It doesn't matter if you believe in God to follow the principle of focusing on the things that are in your control. That said, a few ways to practice this is things like journaling, which is when you write your thoughts down, so you can almost know what you're thinking. and you can make the right judgments out of it.
Mhm.
Things like meditating, it makes you more aware of what kind of thoughts you're entertaining, reasoning, and even things like going on walks just to like relax and calm your mind.
All these things kind of give you a higher, like, reasoning, higher empathetic, and you also care less about what people think.
Yeah, that's one of the other things. So one of the examples of not caring about things outside your control would be to not care about what other people think, because what they think is their concern, it's in their control. Like, I can't control what Dylan would think about me. It could be good or bad, but I can't control that. I can only control what attitude I take on what he thinks. So I could either put a lot of importance to it, or I could realise that it's not really worth much.
So there's quite a large importance, as you were saying before, with meditation and everything, on reflection,
Yeah,
and reflecting on your
reflection
actions
really, yeah, that's true.
to improve in the long run.
Yeah.
So it's not an instant thing. You don't just become in the same way in like virtue ethics. You don't just become virtuous. It's something you try and develop over time. But then that could bring you on to maybe some of the like weaknesses of Stoicism, in the sense that like it for some people maybe it's not quite like they want more like strict moral guidance. So
True. Another weakness I would say is this is about regulating your emotions, right? And you do that by choosing the right attitude, by reasoning and thinking. But what if you're drunk or delirious, or you haven't got enough sleep or whatever? In those situations, like, you can't think yourself to get out of being drunk, right? So if you're intoxicated, this philosophy doesn't really work that well for you. So that would be one of the few weaknesses. You could say.
Yeah. Also, quite a lot of people tend to think, when maybe you thought this when you've heard us discussing it, that there's an idea that you should just bottle up your emotions and push them away, and just because you're not allowed to show emotions, maybe you're thinking to be stoic, but actually it's kind of the opposite of that. You need to tackle and deal with your emotions. It's not that kind of Victorian idea that was fairly placed on society, the kind of emotional suppression. It's more tackling your emotions to try and overcome them.
Yeah, to think and work through the emotions.
Yeah.
That wouldn't be a weakness of Stoicism, but that would be a weakness as in the sense that
the way people
mistake Stoicism.
Yeah, perhaps one cannot move forward if they don't recognize those weaknesses and just like contemplate on that.
Yeah, definitely. Oh yeah, so the Stoics, they value the freedom of choice, as we said, right? How you choose to think, how you choose to act, how you choose to respond to things. But they also value time. They see that as something invaluable that you should preserve at all time. So they like to keep the fact that they may leave this life at any point in their mind. What that does is that really creates urgency for moral improvement. So things like, let's take being good, for example. They try and become as good as possible, as soon as possible. And it also puts misfortunes into perspective.
Yeah.
Like, so many times I've read a philosopher being in pain or like a bad circumstance, and he would tell himself, I'm going to leave soon, life is temporary, so let me be just patient and bear with it. It's not going to last forever. The same goes with greed and luxury. They tell themselves, I'm going to be gone, all this is going to be gone, this will all be dust and clay in a while. So why do I care about these things as if they're going to be lasting and they're going to be with me for all eternity? These are little techniques that they use to not value externals.
What did the Stoics believe happened in the afterlife, or did they not kind of discuss that?
They did discuss it in the sense that they tried to not be scared of death, because death is indifferent. They wanted to be indifferent to it.
Because it comes under kind of overall, probably the main message of the philosophy is that you can't control things that are outside your control, which that includes death as well as all the other things we spoke about, like money or your boss firing you, I mean, a lot of people try and control these things. When you think about money, you might hear this and think, well, if I work hard in school, I'll get a good job and therefore earn a lot of money. But you can't necessarily, maybe, the attitude you had to your education might like push you towards that. But nothing at the end of the day is still a certainty. You're not certainly determined to make money, you don't know what's going to happen, economic crash, like all sorts in the world.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
So does that mean you shouldn't be working or revising in class, or you shouldn't be going to work and trying to earn money? No, what that means is you focus on what you control, and that's the input. How much you revise, how hard you're working, how much you're trying to be of service for the world. Those things, how much time and effort you put in, right? Those things are in your control. You focus on that, and once, if you're a Stoic and you do that, you're happy, right? Whether you get a good grade out of it or whether you get a good paycheck out of it is extra, it's bonus. It's not the main reward. The work itself is a reward.
The outcome doesn't matter. It's what you put into it that actually.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, that's what they desire.
And I think we should briefly discuss the value of family to a Stoic, because it might sound, when you're talking about like letting possessions go and stuff, how it applies differently to people. You know, like if someone in your family dies, should you not be attached to them?
They would be indifferent to them.
Yeah.
Yeah. That isn't to say that they don't love their family or they don't care about it. It's just resilience on their part to, I mean, if, like, let's say there's a philosopher that meditates for an hour, right? He's basically made himself so mentally strong and so used to impermanence that he would be probably fine because he's had that training, right? So it's almost resilience on your part. People think it's, when you're indifferent to family, it's like you don't care about your mom or like you don't like your sister or whatever, but it's you being strong.
Yeah, and it links to like, if someone in your family does die, obviously you're gonna be sad, because he's not saying you shouldn't have emotions. It's more saying the way in which you go about dealing with that isn't spending the rest of your life in grief about what happened.
Yeah.
It's more about overcoming that, which I think a lot of things people, it's a hard thing to say, you know. None of this philosophy is easy.
There's a difference between grieving for a week and then being depressed for 2 years.
Yeah.
Being depressed for 2 years is like a neurosis. Yeah. Yeah, I remember my old philosophy teacher one of his family members would die, and the judgment that he would make is that they're in a better place now. Rather than see it as a loss for himself, he would see it as a benefit for them.
Yeah.
And through that, he's happy for them.
Yeah.
And that's it's just an example of how reasoning and judgment can be used to.
It's kind of like they have this mindset that they'll keep on living.
Yeah.
They always put a positive spin on it.
Yeah. So even if you don't like Christian or whatever, or Muslim, and you don't necessarily believe in an afterlife, you can still control your attitude to their death.
Yeah.
To make it seem as though they still live on in a better place.
Yeah.
Even if you don't necessarily.
Why do they suppress emotions of sadness or like feeling grief? Why is that
they
advised?
They don't suppress it. They work through it. So they will try and eliminate grief itself.
It's about overcoming the grief.
Yeah.
It's not about just pushing it away.
Yeah.
Because by pushing it away, it's still there. You haven't dealt with the problem.
Because a lot of people, for example, let's take anger for example. A lot of people would get angry, but just not do anything about it.
Yeah.
But then they are still angry. A Stoic would rather be angry and punch someone in the face than be angry or not do anything about it. What in Stoicism, what they try and do is you eliminate that anger through reasoning.
Yeah.
You tell yourself he's doing this because he doesn't know that this is truly wrong. You tell yourself that no moral harm has been caused me. Whatever happened to me is indifferent. And because you haven't been harmed, you wouldn't really feel angry. So you try and reason and work through that anger rather than just bottle it up.
Because as we've repeated throughout this podcast, about things being outside your control, people are probably the biggest thing that you'll encounter in life that are outside your control. Other people's actions aren't things you can control. Like if someone punches you, that wasn't anything you could control, and therefore the way you respond to that should be based on
the way you respond to it is what you control.
Yeah.
Yes.
And is your response going to be irrational or rational? Is your response going to make the situation worse, or is it going to make the situation better? That's what you focus on. Because
by doing that, I think most situations are dealt with better. Like, just because maybe you punch someone because they punch you because it makes you feel better in the short term, it's still necessarily, what have you actually achieved by that?
Yeah.
Like, you've just added to the kind of violence and you're not showing those.
If anything, you've almost become like a slave emotion. Yeah. Because he controls how you feel now through his actions.
He does.
You've been succumbed to become provoked by someone else.
Yeah.
So that's lack of moral freedom
Yeah.
So if you value moral freedom, which you can choose to value, which is in your control, you wouldn't get angry.
So should we do a quick summary before we just
Yeah.
end?
Can we do how Stoicism influenced things like psychology and
In
stuff
history,
like that?
yeah.
So through Stoicism, does anyone here do psychology?
No.
No. Okay. If you do psychology, you would know two types of therapies. You would know about cognitive behavioral therapy, and you would know REBT. Both of these stem from Stoicism. REBT was made by someone called Albert Ellis. You know the quote I said, it's not what happens to us, but the judgment that we make out of it?
Yes.
That's like the core of REBT. That's what he tells his patients to treat
Mhm.
them. Yeah, those are the main influences by Stoicism.
Interesting.
Also on I know when we read, there's quite a lot of books about it that are wrote by like historic like Roman emperors and stuff.
Mhm.
So it has quite an influence maybe historically and politically
Yeah.
in that sense. As in,
Mhm.
it's quite good guidance, particularly if you're like a leader of an
Yeah,
empire or a country or whatever it may be now.
Because one of the Stoic philosophers, one of the sources of Stoicism that we have is actually a journal written by someone called Marcus Aurelius.
Mm.
He was an emperor. He was the most powerful man in his time
Yeah.
in the known world.
Mm-hmm.
So it can definitely help with leadership and politics.
Yeah. So it has a quite a big impact as well
Mhm.
on history. So yeah, that's a quick summary then. So the main point to take away for you as listeners
Is
would probably
focus
be
on what is in your control, not what is outside of your control.
yeah,
Right.
and focus on your attitude
On your
and
response.
and your response to the situation.
And I agree with all of those points.
Virtue is good, vice is bad. Everything else is
Mhm.
different.
Yeah,
Any misfortune or suffering can be used to practice virtue for a
Yeah.
Stoic and practice his moral principles.
you should aim to overcome your emotions
Mhm.
rather than bottle them up and
Yeah.
push them away.
Aim
Yeah.
to be less materialistic.
Mhm.
Aim to
Yeah,
kind of be more like the sage.
Yeah.
And
hold value in things other than the things you physically possess.
Yeah.
I think is it.
cultivate new virtues.
And don't waste time.
Yeah.
Have urgency in your life.
Okay, I think that's all then from us.
Yes.
So
Thank you for listening.
thank you for listening, and we'll see you if there's another episode.